When I read Carson's story, I just thought this is a story that needs to be told, not
Make
read.
me cry and we just started.
Sorry. I'm probably going to cry because I cried through your whole application. Um, so I very much appreciate you guys willing to do this because the interviews that I did yesterday and whatnot, were very different from this one. And so I can't even begin to imagine how hard this must be. I know this is not something that's been far from me for very long. But I also want to remember him. And you said you love talking about him, and
I don't get to talk about him that often, so I will.
yeah, and I think I had another friend that lost a child, and she said people don't want to talk to me about because they're afraid that it's going to upset me. But in fact, like, I want to remember my daughter. I want to talk about her. I want to keep her memory alive. And I don't want people to be afraid to ask me, to talk about her. So I thought this might be,
Always defaults to like, oh, I don't want to bring him up. I don't want to make you think about it. I'm like, that's all I think about.
but right. And I think that's the thought is I don't want to ruin your day by making you think about him when really, in fact, there's not a day that you're not thinking about him. So
it makes my day when I get to talk about him.
right. Yeah. So I thought if you guys are willing to do it, like, this would be a great way to just say it's okay to talk about this, and this happens, and this is also another need for infertility coverage, and things that, like, most people, first of all, most people think that infertility is only a female disease, which it's not. But the what they envision in their head sometimes is just one part of infertility, and something like your story is just so much more than that. And I think people need to hear that and understand what we're always fighting for. So you guys are amazing for doing this, and
Thank you.
I just want to hear about Carson. Like, I want to hear about him.
Well, this is Sam. I don't know if you can see him, but
yeah, I can see him. And I have all of your pictures that you sent me here.
I mean, I'm biased, but I guess we'll start at the beginning. So Mike and I have been together since we were like 13. Started dating in 8th grade, as much as you can date in 8th grade. We stayed together, went to high school together, stayed together through college. He went to Towson University in Maryland. I went to Pittsburgh. So we stayed together for those 4 years. And when we graduated, we got an apartment and got our dog, who's also back there. That's Petey. That was in 2012. In 2015, we got engaged in Disney. We're big Disney people, me more so than him. But then we got married in August of 2015, bought our first house, which was a flip, and Mike did pretty much all the work on said flip.
Wow.
But that's where Carson came to our home in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. So I guess
I was 28, and I was like, by 28 we want to start trying to have kids, and as most men are, I think Mike was a little nervous at first, but obviously he got on board, and it didn't take long. I mean, within 3 months I was pregnant with Carson.
Yeah, on April 20th she laid down a gift bag, and I was like, what is this? Like, why is this on the counter right now? And I kind of knew right away that we had good news. So like I said, how many tests did you take? Maybe 9, 10 tests.
I think that's normal.
And we're pregnant. So expected date was December
31st.
31st. That's what it was.
Wow.
Supposed to be.
Then everyone's like, oh, maybe he'll be the first baby born on in 2019. And I was like, oh, of course that'll happen. And then 9 days later, I'm 9 days overdue, still waiting for him. I'm like, okay, where'd that
But the pregnancy was good?
Totally healthy, normal,
Perfect.
No problems. He was healthy. And at 9 days, they finally induced me. Like, they took pity on me. I'm like, please just let me go with this. So I went in and induced me. It was like 28 hours before I finally gave in and got a C-section. I was like, I can't do this anymore. By the time this baby's ready to come out, I'm not going to have anything left to push. So he came via C-section. which ended up being a blessing given his disease.
His condition, yeah.
He was born with like a big open sore on his elbow, which you could probably see in a lot of those pictures. It never really went away. And he had one on like his nose and his ear, and his nails looked kind of like they were long and like they just looked odd.
So it was actually, it was pretty amazing actually how the diagnosis came. So when he was born, with the elbow, the ear, like Jess was talking about, they kind of chalked it up to friction in the womb, maybe sitting in the same spot for a long time. He had some torticollis, so it's like, you know, he had like a kinked neck, so they just figured he was sat in the same position for a while. We were in recovery after about 24 hours, and his heart rate just randomly like dropped down. So it wasn't, you know, down into the 80s, nothing crazy, but they decided to take him up to the NICU, and that's where we met the first physician who said, you know, this open wound doesn't seem normal to me. I'm gonna text, or I'm gonna email a colleague at Penn.
Yeah, it was at the University of Pennsylvania.
At UPenn, and to send them pictures if you let me, to see what they think about this. And that's kind of where, you know, the EB journey, or the epidermolysis bullosa journey started.
Yeah, I mean, he looked at us and he's like, oh, you know, I think he could possibly have epidermolysis bullosa. We're both like, what? Like, what is that?
What is that? Right.
And the first thing he said was, don't Google it.
Yeah.
Because he was like, what you see is going to scare you. And he's like, I promise you that if Carson has this, it's a mild form, and he's not going to look like those babies on the internet. And then, of course, the first thing I did was Google it, because I'm like, I've never heard this before.
Okay, why would you not? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, what am I looking at? What is this going to be? And I just vividly remember that night, like sleeping, and every time I woke up, like epidermolysis bullosa is what was on my mind. Like I couldn't shake it. So he sent his pictures to his dermatologist friend. He agreed that he thought it looked like EB. So he stayed in the NICU at our local hospital for like another day. We waited until they could transfer him over to the University of Pennsylvania, where he'd be seen by Children's Hospital Philadelphia doctors, CHOP. I mean, that's where we spent most of our time. So we got transferred there. Again, like I was fresh off a C-section, hadn't slept in like 2 days at this point, and like here we are going into the city, like taking our baby literally in the middle of the night to this NICU where, you know, we didn't even know where he was, where we were. So it was scary, and we had to leave him there overnight because they didn't have any place for us to stay. And I just remember leaving and being like, oh, I'm a horrible mom. Like, what mom could leave their baby, you know, in a hospital like that? So that was really hard. And it was like the first test of many we came to find. But we went back the next morning. I tried to get there in time to feed him. And we waited all day for what would become his primary doctor, which is the dermatologist at CHOP. And I guess you can talk about what she said.
So yeah, so when she came in, you know, with the CHOP team, they come in with, you know, it's a learning hospital, so they come in with a bunch of people. So he got examined by, you know, a couple residents, and then the main fellow and physician, Dr. Perman. So she's head of dermatology and a very big EB advocate. You know, kind of more of like a world-renowned, you know, with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. It's a big one. So she came in and said, yeah, it looks like it could be EB. She didn't think it was a severe case at that point. You know, typically with EB kids, and specifically RDEB, the skin is super, super fragile. And in Carson's case, while it was very fragile, it was, you know, it wasn't like delicate to the touch, you know.
Most kids with Carson's diagnosis are born with like large missing areas of skin, like
right.
Their whole foot will be literally completely raw, their whole hand. And he wasn't like that. We're like, our kid is healthy, what are you talking, like he looks great, why are we here? And we felt like so trapped, because we're like, we don't need to be here, our kid is healthy, he doesn't need to be in the NICU in this world-renowned hospital, like can we please just take him home? Mm-hmm. And she kind of dove in and started telling us all the different types of EB, and we were like, what in the world, you know, we're way over our head. And immediately they were like, you should do genetic testing, you should do this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, listen, my kid's like 2 days old. If he's going to have this terminal disease, I don't want to know that. You know, like I want to treat him as if he's going to have a long, normal life. So we opted to do no genetic testing at that point. Basically, we just wanted to get out of there. We wanted to bring him home, and we knew we could handle it, whatever it was. So a couple hours after she saw him, we were discharged and brought him home, and I don't think we've ever been so relieved to be home. It was just a long 48 hours, and we were just happy to finally have him home.
Yeah. So I'd say the first like day or two were pretty normal days. You know, just kind of getting used to the life with an infant in the house, and it was you know, exciting, nerve wracking. But things started to change, I think, a little bit after day 2 or day, you know, I guess day 1.5 when we gave him his first bath. You know, we kind of treated it like a normal bath, like you would, you know, in the tub with a little basket or something. And after the bath, I guess really that night is when we were changing him, and all of a sudden we see a huge blister on his back, basically from his shoulders all the way down to like mid back. It's just a blister filled like one you get running, but filled with fluid. And we're like, well, I remember falling to my knees, like, what is this? Like, what has happened to him? And that's when we kind of started to know that it was, you know, this disease, what his diagnosis was going to be a lot more serious, a lot more difficult than we thought it was going to be. So obviously we called the physician immediately, calling Penn and then getting a hold of Chop and just saying, we need to see you. We need this is happening. And that's kind of where our, you know, back and forth between Chop and home really started, was, you know, after this giant blister, saying, what do we do?
And EB isn't just, it's not just a skin condition. You know, a lot of people are, the worst is when people are like, oh, my kid has eczema. I'm like, no, like, this isn't like that. You know, EB isn't just the skin. It's a connective tissue disorder. So it causes issues with the protein. So, I mean, it's not just his skin, it's his airway, it's his, you know, some kids have severe GI issues. They have issues with their eyes, like their eyes get blistered. Like, literally every part of their body is impacted. And Carson did great. In the first month or so, he was eating a ton, he was gaining a lot, and then all of a sudden he started, you know, failure to thrive, as they call it, and nothing we did was working. We couldn't, you know, we pumped all different kinds of formula into him, you know, on top of the breast milk, like everything we could think of, and he just wasn't gaining. So a lot of the issue we had was just going back and forth on whether or not he needed a G-tube, which I don't know if you're familiar, but it's a feeding tube in their belly. And we kind of kept going back and forth, because everything with EB is, there's no good decision. It's always kind of weighing which one's going to do less damage. And so we kind of pushed off the G-tube for as long as we could, because we didn't know what it would look like if we put a G-tube in his belly. Like, how would that heal? How do you protect it? With EB, it's all about bandages, and they can't just use a Band-Aid. You know, we use very, very expensive little, like, kind of thin foam products, and it was all about trying to figure out, how do we get those to stay in place? How do we get them to protect him? You can't use anything with adhesive on it. So it was a lot of work, as you can probably imagine, 24/7.
You guys were young. I mean,
yeah.
You know, it's, you're trying to figure this out in your 20s. You know?
Right, and it's like, you know, everything you do that's normal for an infant, you couldn't do with Carson. You know, like he ended up getting a big flat spot on his head, because we couldn't put him in a carrier all the time like you would, to avoid that, because then that would cause blisters, and we couldn't put a helmet to fix the flat spot, because there's no way he could tolerate that. So it was always something. It was just a lot of, like, game planning, just trying to figure things out, and nothing was easy. I mean, a bath took 2 hours with Carson, because we had to prep all his bandages, change all his bandages. Like, it was a lot of work. And there were a lot of times where we were very frustrated, and I'd just say, I can't do this. I have to walk out of the room. But you can't do that. You know, you can't give up on your baby. So it was hard. It was difficult. The rewarding thing is, like, he was the happiest baby.
Yes.
You know, he never showed his frustration.
Nope.
The bath time takes 2 hours. Like, he never stopped smiling. Like,
I mean, I look at this picture and I'm just like, that is a happy baby.
Yeah.
He was really happy all the time. He never lost patience. You know, when normal babies sit on that changing table and they're like, how fast can I get off? And that wasn't him, you know, and I feel like he was given that gift for a reason. Mm-hmm. It was hard, but every second was worth it. All those smiles made it worth it. And so he did great. I mean, he was home for a while.
Yeah. So I guess one of the harder things, and the thing that we tended to, I guess, avoid in conversation was what was happening to his voice. So with his version of EB, it's called junctional EB, specifically Hurlitz, or junctional severe. It happens to be, I guess, the most deadly version. The expected life expectancy is about 5 months for babies with junctional Hurlitz, EB. So we got that diagnosis when we finally decided to pull the trigger on the genetic
He was
testing.
probably like 3 or 4 months old. And he was a little bit unique because we both carry the mutation, obviously, for EB. And the one mutation that he had was typically associated with Hurlitz junctional EB, and the other one, they were like, we've never seen this before.
Never seen it.
So they were like, we don't know, we don't know what it's going to look like because
you don't know how the gene's going to express itself, what it's going to affect, like the normal junctional EB Hurlitz, or if it's going to express itself differently, just from how the genes work. You may have some, so junctions between like the 2 layers of skin, your dermis and your epidermis. So basically, they don't know if it's going to hold itself enough or not, or how it's going to affect specifically mucous membranes.
Right. And his doctor kept saying, like, we're hopeful. Like,
Yeah.
clinically, he looks really, really good for a kid with junctional EB.
Yeah.
And so she's like, we're just going to have to wait and see how this thing plays out. So at that time, we'd been seeing a nutritionist, a GI doctor, dermatology, and an ENT, because like Mike said, his voice started getting really raspy. And like he was just breathing heavier. So we started going to an ENT. We were planning on going on vacation in July. So we took him to the ENT because I was going to fly with him by myself. And I was like, let's get him checked, make sure he looks okay. And that was probably one of the worst visits we've ever had. I just remember him, and to do the ENT, they go in through his nose and down through his throat. And I always left the room for it because I couldn't stand. And thankfully, Mike was strong enough to sit there while they did that to him. And he looked at it and he was like, he has blistering on his vocal cords. And I'm like, okay, his vocal cords, like at the time I didn't realize that's his airway. And so he said, down the road, Carson's probably going to need a trach. And he's like, you don't have to worry about that now. It's probably a long way off. And he's like, but I have to tell you, like a trach is not going to be good for a kid with EB. And I remember leaving that appointment and saying, Mike, we're going to lose him. I knew it. At that time, I was like, we're going to lose him to this. And that appointment was the worst one yet. And that was probably like, I don't know, a couple weeks before we got hospitalized. And he was 6 months. I took him for a 6-month well visit, just to like the regular pediatrician. I was by myself because I didn't expect anything crazy. And he was tired. We could never get nap time coordinated with trips to the doctor. So he was definitely past exhaustion. And after like 20 minutes, he just started freaking out. And I looked at him and I was like, I know something's wrong. I could just see the panic written on his face. So I was like, call an ambulance right now. And we couldn't have been in a better place,
Right.
Doctor's office. They had an oxygen mask, which, in retrospect, if your airway is completely occluded, an oxygen mask isn't doing anything. But at the time I was like, get the oxygen, call the ambulance. I was able to calm him down enough that he fell asleep and he was breathing fine.
Kind of. He had a little
his
notice to it,
baseline
but
fine. Then the ambulance picked us up and we went to the emergency room where Mike met us, and they had their ENT come look at him and they're like, we're going to send him to CHOP. That's where all of his specialists are. And we're like, thank God, like that's where we want to be too.
Right.
And that was July 7th of 2019. And we never came home with him after that. And it's not what you expect. You go in there, we were so hopeful. We were like, we're going to get discharged within 24 hours. Like, this is his baseline. He's fine.
Right.
By day 2, they were like, oh, we're moving you over to the PICU. And I'm like, the PICU? Like, my kid doesn't need to be in intensive care. Like, he's fine. So he went under. They put him under to scope him. And that's when they came out and they're like, his airway is almost completely closed. And he's like, thank God we didn't send you home yesterday. So 2 days in, he went in for tracheostomy surgery, and we finally got the G-tube at that time because we're like, well, we're doing it. The reason we didn't do the G-tube was largely because we didn't know the risks of putting him to sleep, intubating him, what it could do to his airway. So we did them all at once. It was probably like a 3-hour surgery. He came out and it was just scary. He's so swollen. Like, it's not Carson. It's not what he's supposed to look like. And the swelling really did a lot of damage to his skin because, it doesn't have the elasticity ours does. So when he's swollen like a balloon, blisters were everywhere. His skin just couldn't handle it. And he had gone in there with his skin looking great, like probably the best it ever has.
It was probably 4 days before we had seen a dermatology appointment, and she said, clinically, this is the best I have seen him.
Yeah.
She couldn't be more impressed with how we were doing with his skin. the blisters that he had, healing up and really not getting any new ones just because of, really
meticulous.
just the attention to detail and care we were giving him. I mean, it's, you use a lot of Vaseline based, petroleum based products, and he was always lathered up. So Dr. Berman was super impressed. And at that point too is when she said, this voice is scaring me.
She was worried.
She was worried.
So so when they do a tracheostomy, they paralyze and sedate them for a minimum of a week, largely because the site needs to heal. They don't want any risk, especially with babies, of them pulling it out. So he was paralyzed and sedated for a week. Then they started waking him up, which was hard. At that point, he'd been on all kinds of very serious narcotics for a week, and we had to watch him withdraw, which was terrible. This is an infant, and he's withdrawing from hard drugs. It's terrifying.
Yeah, they have him on fentanyl, and I guess the Laudid. So he's withdrawing from opiates is basically what's happening to,
Wow.
a 7-month-old baby.
Right. And I mean, after they woke him up, within, I don't know, probably 3-4 days, he was starting to turn into himself. He was doing better. He was picking up his toys.
Mm-hmm.
He was interested in us. He still wasn't smiling, but my niece came to visit. She was 4 at the time, and she's obsessed with Carson. So she came to visit, and he was so interested in watching her, and he was doing well. So they moved him. They stepped him down to a progressive care unit, and he had been doing really well there. They started taking him off of the ventilator, having him breathe on his own. So he was doing great. It was scary for us because we had to learn how to take care of a trach, which
Right.
I was horrified. I was like having nightmares about thinking of taking a trach out and putting in a new, it was scary. But we did what we needed to do. We learned how to take care of the G-tube. We started taking the classes for the trach. Carson was progressing well. He had OT, PT coming in to see him. And then one night his heart rate spiked, and it was a couple days they couldn't get it to go down. And I had gone home for, I think I went to the gym finally. And Mike called me and he was like, "You're not going to like it, but they're moving him back into the PICU." And I was like, they told us it was because he needed this more individualized care that they couldn't get in the PCU. And I thought, there's got to be more to it than that. There's something they're not telling us. And then probably within a day or so, they're like, he has an infection. And that had always been our biggest fear with his skin being so open. We're like, he's so prone to infection.
That's one of the most dangerous things for these kids is infections, and because his skin was so good, it was never really a worry. But with the IV and the amount of fluids he was getting and how much damage his skin has done from the swelling, he was now prone to it. We never saw, at least what we saw from the blood tests. We became experts ourselves in all the tests that he'd done. And we never noticed any increase in white blood cell counts, things like that, things that are usually at least obvious for an infection, but they saw something and moved him over.
And within a couple days, they had done every test under the sun, and they're like, we can't find the source of this infection. We can't tell if it's his blood, if it's skin, they couldn't figure it out. So they put him on just a gamut of antibiotics to cover everything they could possibly think of. And finally, one of the blood cultures came back that he was septic. Kids with EB get Pseudomonas a lot just because of the way their skin is, and the Pseudomonas had gotten into his bloodstream. So we were relieved to have found the source of it. At least they knew how to treat it. And within a couple days, he kind of started turning around. And then one night, we had to clean his trach every single night. And one night, Mike and I opted to not do it. We let the nurses do it, and I'll kind of always regret it. But that night, it was probably around 10 p.m. and his heart rate and his oxygen level started to drop. And we'd been pretty good at watching these monitors. We knew what we were looking at, and it started dropping. And I was like, "This isn't going back up."
It's not going up.
I was like, something is wrong. So within minutes, like Chill's just talking about, within minutes there were probably 25 people in his room. They didn't press the code bell, but they could have, and they didn't only because everybody was already there. Carson got a lot of attention because he was so little and so complex. And it was terrifying. His oxygen dropped to the lowest, I think was around 40%. And they're calling out all the code meds, they had to make sure that his blood pressure didn't drop, that his heart kept beating. And I just remember sitting in the corner of the room being like, this can't be it. This can't be the minute that I lose him. And thank God, he did come back. What had happened is when they cleaned his trach, blood got in it and it clotted and blocked the bottom of his trach, which had never happened when Mike and I did it. So we were a little bit regretful that we didn't do it that day. But the ENT saw it. He was able to change out the trach, and they basically went in and just suctioned it out to make sure everything was clear. He was fine, but his skin definitely took a beating from what they did. I mean, at that point, they're not considering his EB. They're like, we got
They're just
to
trying to
and,
save
whatever happens, happens. And that was scary. The next day, I was just like, wow, they're not kidding when they say anything can happen in the blink of an eye, because that could have been it. So he wasn't baptized yet, but the next day I was like, we need to get him baptized because I don't know what this looks like for him. So our family came and the in-house priest came and we baptized him.
Yeah. So the one big thing with the trach and with what they're trying to avoid with EB was what's called a cuff. So your airway, it's a certain volume. The trach is small. It's a lot smaller than your actual airway. So it allows room for when you exhale for air to come out, through your nose and your mouth, but you're going to push air in through the trach. So what they never wanted to do with him, because of the EB and what it can do to your mucous membrane, is they never wanted to inflate the cuff. So what the cuff does is it traps all that area, that free area, pushes against the mucous membrane of the skin, and allows the ventilator to have complete control of the amount of air going in and out. So you can measure things a lot better, a lot more accurately, off the ventilator. So after that night, they put up the cuff, and that was when it was like, this is it.
Yeah, I mean, we had avoided it for so long because with the cuff up, it can rub on the inside, and we didn't know what that could do to him. And the ENT wasn't willing to find out. So we used as many different ventilators, as many different ventilator settings, everything we could think of to avoid putting up this cuff. But at that point, they were like, we have to.
There's only one choice.
Which was scary because I'm like, it's either that or he's not going to live. So like, this is our only option. So we put the cuff up. He was doing pretty well with it. Again, once he coded, they paralyzed and sedated him again. Ended up being pretty much forever, which we didn't know. But yeah. So they paralyzed and sedated him. He recovered pretty well from the infection. All things considered, he really was doing pretty good. And his numbers were coming back on the ventilator. So he was on some pretty high settings post code, and what they want to try and do is bring the oxygen levels down, bring the pressure down. So he was starting to trend in the right direction. We were down to an extra 20% oxygen, almost to neutral air, which is, in the grand scheme of things, when we're up at like 60, 70s is really good progress. It started to become that wasn't working.
Right.
We had to keep turning the vent settings up every day.
Basically with the infection, something flipped.
And we had one doctor that kept coming in and saying, his lungs are very sick. His lungs are very sick. I'm like, my kid's lungs are healthy. Like, he came in here with good lungs. Like, I know he's fine. And they had wanted to get him down for a CT scan to see his lungs because we just didn't know what was going on. Like, why were his settings getting worse and worse when seemingly he was getting healthier? So finally it got to the point where they felt like he was stable enough to bring him down to the CT. So we did, which was scary in itself because we just didn't know, if he codes in the middle of this hallway, like, what do we do? So we got into the CT, came back, everything was fairly uneventful. My sister was there at the time, and Mike's twin brother was there at the time, and Carson's attending came in and said, we got his CT results back, and she just said, do you want to sit down? And at that point I was like, oh God, like, what does this look like? And I was like, no, I'm fine. I was doing his bandages, and I felt like at this point we'd already been on this roller coaster for 5 weeks. Like, what could she possibly tell me that could be any worse? And we looked at the CT, and it was like, what nightmares are made of. Obviously, I don't know what I'm looking at, but, she pointed out, she's like, all these little black spots are pockets of air. I think we actually missed in between there. One of his lungs collapsed.
It was after the
was it?
Mm-hmm.
I can't even remember the way things went. But so she looked at it, and she's like, all those little black spots are pockets of air. And she's like, those aren't supposed to be there. She's like, these are his lungs. And for lack of a better term, they were kind of shredded. Because of his EB and just the high pressures of the ventilator, it completely destroyed his lungs. And I just remember looking at it and being like, this can't be real. Like, this can't be possible. And so she kind of was like, we'll set up a meeting, met, for you and all the doctors in a couple days, and we'll talk next steps. In the meantime, one of his lungs collapsed. So they put in a chest tube to drain the air out of his lungs, and that worked. Like, it seemed like it did come back and it looked okay. He was getting lung x-rays probably every 3 hours at this point, just keeping a constant eye on it. Obviously, we were afraid of the other one collapsing or getting pneumonia. Like, we had all these lung concerns. The other one did collapse. Again, we got another chest tube. And through all of this, like, he was doing okay. We had our meeting with the doctors. So it was his dermatologist, his attending at the PICU, general surgery came.
The ENT team. ENT,
the pulmonologists, all of them. And the one thing I said going into this is, I need every single one of you in this room to tell me that Carson can't get better. And I said, if you say that, I can live with it. But I thought if he had one shred of any hope of getting better, that I couldn't let him go. So that's what I did. I said, I need every one of you to tell me that he can't recover. And they did. Every single one of them was like, we've never seen anything like this before. We've never seen lungs like this. We've never seen EP like this. And they said, from what we can tell, he's not coming back from this. And I could live with that if I knew that that was the case, because I couldn't see him suffer anymore. And at that point, we almost lost him once, and I couldn't ever live with myself if I knew I lost him in an emergency like that. So we made the decision, 2 days later, that we were going to withdraw support. And, obviously that's the hardest decision you can make. But with Carson's diagnosis, we knew, like, we're sparing him the life that it's just going to be full of struggle. And what's the point of keeping him here if he's going to live on a ventilator and that's going to be his life? And at this point, we hadn't seen him open his eyes in a month. We haven't seen Carson. And obviously it was a hard decision, but it comes with a little bit of relief, because I knew, I'm like, your fight is over. You don't have to do this anymore. And so our family came. We did a lot of things with him. We got his handprint and his footprints and, all the things that we could think to do. Everyone came and said their goodbyes, and my niece was the hardest for me because she's 4. She didn't get it. Our nephew was 2 at the time, and he couldn't come because he's so little, and it was just hard. It's hard to stand there and watch everybody say goodbye, and it's hard because it was like a feeling of dread, but you're also like, oh my God, get this over with. Like, I can't survive this day. So everybody said their goodbyes, they left. And we hadn't held him pretty much this whole entire time since we were in the hospital for 6 weeks.
Yeah, his skin was so delicate at that time. So,
and the ventilator.
Yeah, there was one last moment when we started turning off the paralytic. They can't take a ventilator off and leave him paralyzed. They have to let him kind of come back. So he was still on the pain meds, still getting fluids, but he started coming off the paralytic, and he finally, you could see him start like twitching and moving a little bit. And we were lucky enough to see him, open his eyes again.
Oh.
And
we wanted a smile, but that wasn't going to happen. We were just happy to see him see us and know, like, we're there, buddy. So we lifted the paralytic. Finally, I was allowed to hold him for only like the second or third time since he'd been there. And, you have to tell them, like, we're ready. You're not ready. So at that point, they turned off the ventilator, and, we just cuddled him for as long as it took. And it was awful. But, after about like an hour and a half, they came in, and, they said he's gone.
So, yeah. So August 17th is when we lost him.
And I just said to him, please tell me you're okay. Show me somehow that you're okay. And I kid you not, we pull out of that hospital parking garage. The first song that comes on was Only the Good Die Young. And I was like, that's him. I know that's him. And I think about that every day because, all of this, I know he's here and I know he's okay. And it's very hard, but I have to remind myself, Carson's life, it wouldn't look like what we dreamed for him if he was still here. He couldn't do all the things normal kids do. Like, it just wouldn't be like that. He wouldn't be able to swim. He has a trach. He couldn't play sports. Traveling with him we could do it, but it would be really hard. And So, in a lot of ways we know we saved him because he doesn't have to do this anymore. So as you can imagine, that's not something we want to do again. I mean, obviously I would never trade 1 second of Carson for anything in this universe, but I also don't think we could survive that again. So while he was in the hospital, we met with the genetics team and just learned, like, what are our options? Every kid has a 25% chance of having EB. And that was, Carson was probably 1 in a million. So a 25% chance to me feels astronomical.
Right.
So we were like, we can't do that. So we knew IVF was really our only option. Thank God, PGD testing is amazing. So we met with the IVF team in September, about a month after Carson passed, largely because we knew this was going to be quite a process. So we did that, and we got all our blood work done, and they started developing the probe that they would use to do the PGD testing. And I think it was Christmas Eve. It was either Christmas Eve or the 23rd. We got word from, who did it? I can't remember the name. Anyway, we got word that the probe was done. We were like, oh, that's exciting. It was a little faster than we thought. So we moved right into a retrieval cycle in February. Just a couple days after my 30th birthday, we did the first retrieval. I did really well with the stims. Like, my body handles things well, so like I largely wasn't affected by it. So we did the first retrieval. We got 11 eggs. 8 of them were mature. All 8 of them fertilized using ICSI. So that was good. We felt like our numbers were doing pretty good. 6 of them made it to blastocyst, but only 5 were really strong enough to be tested for PGD. So we sent them in for testing. 3 of them were normal. They all carried EB, but they didn't have it. 1 of them had EB. It was a girl, and then 1 of them had an extra chromosome. So 2 of them weren't usable. So we had 3 healthy embryos. I'm like, all right, great. We'll never have to do this again because all 3 of these are going to take, and it's going to be super easy. So we started working towards our first transfer, I think probably the end of February, beginning of March. And us and our doctors were kind of like, this is going to be a cakewalk. Like, I have nothing wrong with me. Mike's really healthy. Like, why? There's no problem. So we didn't really do a whole lot of, initial testing because we pretty much figured the standard is going to be enough. We did the first transfer in March 31st. We squeezed it in right before it closed down for coronavirus. And they called me, they're like, sorry to tell you, like, you're not pregnant. And I was like, what? I was shocked because I couldn't believe that I was like, this, what? So we were like, okay, well, I guess we'll do an ERA because that was the one thing we thought maybe they're just transferring at the wrong time. So we did the ERA. It came back that I was 24 hours pre-receptive. So we're like, okay, at least we have an answer. Like, now we can give that into our second transfer and surely it will work. So that's what we did. We did the ERA. We added 24 extra hours of progesterone. It didn't work again. And that was June 30th. We got the news, no, I guess it would be June 26th or something. We got the news. The same day we're moving out of our apartment, that we moved into because we sold our house after Carson passed. We built a new house closer to family. And we were moving that day. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, now we're standing in our empty bedroom, and, it just really compounded the feeling of emptiness. We thought that this move and this was all going to be, kind of exciting and something to kind of bring a little bit more value, something to have a little bit more pride in your life, something to be proud of, a new house and then a new, hopefully another baby. And it's just hard
it was defeating. It's
hard, especially when you have a kid like Carson, because he took every second of care of our day. And when you're used to doing that for 7 months, like, every ounce of your energy goes into caring for this baby and then it's gone, we're kind of left with like, well, what the hell do we do now? We're just back to 2 20-somethings, 30-somethings now. And we felt like we didn't have anything to show for the last 5 years of our life, which was really hard because, we're mom and dad. And when Carson passed, I lost that identity. Now I'm just the 30-year-old with the dog, and that was really, really difficult. So we're still having a hard time with that. Like, we don't feel like we have a whole lot of purpose, and with COVID, it's hard because I would love nothing more than to volunteer at CHOP, but I can't because they won't let you. No. So after the second transfer failed, we opted to do a receptiva, which had been offered to us before, but us and the doctor all kind of were like, we don't need it. I don't have endometriosis. I never have any issues. So we did that, and it came back with a BCL6 score of 4, which is the highest like bad score you could get. And I couldn't believe it, because I'm like, I have never had any issues. I've never had any pain. I've never had any trouble with anything. Like there's no way.
Plus we had Carson. So
right, and I
like,
had Carson easily. And so my first thought was like, oh, could the C-section cause it? And he's like, it could have, we don't know. They don't know what causes it, obviously. So then I went in and did an HSP to make sure I didn't have any blocked tubes. I didn't, so we opted to do 60 days of Lupron treatment, which we're almost to the end of. So we're tentatively scheduled to do our next transfer November 19th, with our last embryo. So we obviously don't know how it'll go, but we're hopeful that maybe we finally found the answer. And if not, I don't know what we're looking at, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And obviously it's just, we applied for the grant because IVF is expensive, and we've spent every penny out of pocket, out of our own money. I hope that in a month we're in a very different spot.
So, I mean, your story, like the strength you guys have is just mind-blowing to me. You're not telling a story from 10 years ago. Not that would make it easier, but I feel like you've had time to process and, whatever. This is such a new story that it's, I mean, obviously I can see it all over you guys. You can see it on me. I mean, it's just, there's no words, there's nothing to say. I'm praying for you. There's so many people that have read your story that are praying for you guys, because, you wouldn't wish this on anybody. I wouldn't wish this.
What life will look like at 30. If you would have told me 20 years ago, hey, your infant's going to die and you're going to be sticking needles in yourself, I would have been like, you're out of your mind. Everything we've done up until Carson was right on schedule, right as we thought it would be, and then our whole world flipped upside down, and it hasn't been normal since, and it never will be. But
no, and he'll always be. I mean, he's always part of you. I mean, he's always there. So it's not something that you just forget about and move on. It's a really. So I wanted people to see the other side of what this is needed for, and why, the type of people that coverage helps, and I just think it's so important that they see it. It's not somebody being selfish of.
No.
Right, like we aren't doing this to pick the gender. We're doing this to give our kid the best quality of life we can.
Right. I mean, no one wants to watch their child go through that, but as a parent, you don't want your child to suffer like that. I would do anything for my child, not, to have a child that wouldn't have to go through that. And so, I can't imagine, what it feels like to be in that position. And you guys have just been so incredibly brave. And the pictures you sent, I mean, Carson is just, what a beautiful, beautiful little baby. So I didn't tell you this in the beginning, but we have a friend here in town in Tennessee, and they lost their daughter a few years ago in a car accident. And so every October 17th, today, they have what's called Lay Day. Her name was Layton, and Layton's mom also went through IVF, had triplets. So she's very familiar with the process and the stories that come out of it and whatnot. And so they have Lay Day every year, and they take all the sales, not just the proceeds, but they take the sales from the day and they donate it to children's charities in her name. And Starfish has been one of their recipients for it. And I just could not think of a better couple for their grant to go to than another couple that has been in their shoes, that has experienced a pain that the rest of us can't even possibly imagine and would never want to imagine. So I have a check for South Jersey Fertility for $2,500 because we want to take care of your next transfer.
We love
And
so appreciative of that.
we're just praying that something really, really amazing and wonderful comes out of this. Because I can tell the parents that you are and that you will continue to be for Carson and will be for this new baby as well. So
thank you so much.
we just want to.
We haven't had a lot of wins, and so it's nice to finally get good news.
So please accept that, from Layton and in her memory, and in Carson's memory. And we would love to follow your story.
Yeah, we'll definitely share it with you. I mean, I hope we have good news, and I know one day, even if it's not in November, I know one day we will.
Well, you will have an army of people now praying
Thank you
for this child. So we are all behind you. Our entire group will be behind you, following you. And just, please let us know if there's anything we can do. We just love your story. Love you guys so much for sharing. And we're here, whatever you do.
But I'm happy that I did. I was like, oh, there's so many applications, like what makes us special? But on the other side, I'm like, who can look at my kid and not be touched by it? He's pretty so I just give it a shot, and we're so happy we did. So thank you.
Too. I'm glad. I'm happy to meet you guys and hear your story, and I want to keep Carson's memory alive as well and share his story and share his life.
Thank you.
Because what an amazing kid he must have been. So thank you guys so much, and I'll be in touch. I'll get this to you, and we'll go from there. And we're looking forward to great news to be thankful in November.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Carson.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.